If we don't have that certainty, if we don't have that transparency, you're going to see a lower level of foreign investment. There is an economic cost if you choose to prioritize security issues above economic growth. It's no longer a given that foreign direct investment will simply flow into China at very elevated levels. What's in it for Europe?
China has become a more difficult market for foreign businesses in recent years, and Beijing doesn't seem interested in making changes. That's the new message of a new policy paper put out by the European Chamber of Commerce in China. It represents more than 1,700 firms active in the country. Its president, Jens Eskelund, joins me now. Has China essentially become a bad place for Europeans to do business?
What we have seen is that following COVID, that we have not seen the bounce back in demand that we had expected. And a lot of our companies are squeezed on profitability, amongst others because of what we see in many industries as growing overcapacity. So while a lot of the old issues relate to the regulatory environment, they remain, these are now being compounded by what we see as sort of general lower demand levels and lower profitability. So overall, for many of our companies, China has become a little bit less attractive, and companies are, for many reasons, and not least supply chain resiliency reasons, beginning to explore opportunities to establish supply chains in countries in addition to China.
In your paper, we read that a sentiment is emerging at company headquarters and among shareholders that the returns on China investments are no longer commensurate with the risks faced. And yet we see elsewhere that foreign direct investment from Germany, for example, was just at a recent high in 2023. So it doesn't really seem like firms are reconsidering anything, does it?
I think it depends on what kind of company that you're looking at. It's absolutely correct that very large multinational companies, some of them being German, for them, China will remain an existentially important market. And a lot of these companies are continuing to invest. But if we look broader, for example, at the small and medium-sized enterprises that really are the backbone of the European economy, a lot of these have beginning to find other places to invest, or they are reducing their exposure to China. It's no longer a given that foreign direct investment will simply flow into China at very elevated levels. And that's what we are trying to say to the Chinese government, that, hey, something is happening here, and you need to continue to look at the regulatory environment. You need to continue to look at the demand side in China if you are to continue to attract these very high levels of European FDI coming into China.
Isn't it true that the bar is quite high for other nations, essentially other economies, to replace China? When we think about the infrastructure, when we think about the education of the people there, the fact that this industrial know-how has existed for decades, when we look at the scales of economy, we often hear about India, about Southeast Asia, that bar is quite high. Are we getting close to that, or where are we in relation to a real exodus toward those countries?
What we have seen is that for 71% of our members, their profitability in China today is at the same level or below the global average. And if you have now almost 3/4 of our members telling us that you might be able to get a better deal in terms of return on your investment outside of China, it's only natural that company will begin to look. So that's why we're saying you need to do something now to help us improve on China's position as a top destination for European investment. And if profits are not growing in line with what we can expect to get elsewhere, we need to find out how we can turn this around. And that's what we are trying to now constructively put forward to the Chinese government.
We know, however, that for Beijing, the economy is a second-tier concern compared to its security issues. It's passed a slate of security legislation that has really alienated a number of neighboring countries, for one, but also for businesses active in the country. Do you really believe that Beijing is suddenly going to take up some of these concerns when it's very clear they're willing to sacrifice the economy for their domestic security concerns?
This is, of course, something that needs to get decided by the Chinese government. But I think our task is to point out to the government that if we don't have that certainty, if we don't have that transparency, if we don't have this clarity in terms of what is happening in terms of the national security agenda, then a consequence of that might be that you are going to see a lower level of foreign investment, foreign employment in China. And we, of course, as European companies in China, are keen on ensuring that that is not happening and that we try to address some of these issues. So what we can do is to make it clear that there is an economic cost if you choose to prioritize security issues above economic growth.
It's fair to say that we're probably going to see relations between European firms and China get more difficult in the coming years, especially as European governments feel compelled to stick up for companies that are facing more competition coming out of China. We've already seen with the auto industry, for example, these new tariffs that have been put on the industry there that could bite back. We know that there are other industries, such as machine building industries, for example, that both depend on China for their sales, but are also going to be competing with them more and more. Is it not fair to say that things are going to get harder in the coming years, more than likely, and not better?
I think no one will really dispute that the significant presence of European companies in China has actually been a good thing for China. As European companies in China, we have always been asking ourselves, what's in it for China when we go and establish a facility and sort of grow our activities? And I think one of those things that needs to happen is that there is a question amongst Chinese companies, what's in it for Europe? I think there's no doubt that we would not have been able to succeed and grow in China if we did not have a clear value proposition. And I think at the moment, perhaps it's not clear enough what exactly is the value proposition for Europe. And it's not enough that you can get, for example, very competitively priced electrical appliances. What does it mean for local communities? What does it mean for tax payments? What does it mean for employment? What does it mean for local supply chains? These kind of questions. What really is the value proposition? And I think that is a discussion that needs to be had. You know, how does China create value for Europe? And then hopefully it'll be possible to find a way forward.
All right, that's Jens Eskelund. He's president of the European Chamber of Commerce in China. Jens, thank you very much.